Alrighty then, everyone. So let's come together then. And as Wendy reminded us, this is Halloween week. This is a wonderful time of year. I told you last week about enjoying the little ones in the pumpkin patch and how it's just it reminds me of how exciting life can be and how bountiful life can be. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Halloween. We're going to talk about dropping the masks, dropping the masks. And if you read the email that I sent out last night, I just love this time of year. I love when the kids were little and they wanted their costumes, and Lori would sew their costumes up for them. They spent such time and such care trying to decide what they were going to be. And they come around, the little ones, and they knock on the door, all disguised, and they're superhero or they're Casper the Ghost or whatever they happen to be. They're just so happy to be playing that role, to be pretending that they are the character that they created for this occasion. And of course, as you get older, the little ones come and you play along with them, and oh, a scary ghost, a goblin, a skeleton, I'm afraid, and they get a kick out of that. And sometimes you pretend you don't know what they are. Sometimes I just really don't know what they are because there's some kind of cartoon character or something that's I've never seen before, generation gap. And they're happy to tell you, what their costume is. They let you guess a little bit, and then they'll tell you. And sometimes I think they just want to get going so they can go next door and get more candy. And sometimes the little ones they come to Grandma and Grandpa's house, Mommy brings them over to the family. And of course, the family plays along, Who could this be? We don't know who this could be. Who is this? And then the little one eventually lifts the mask up, and says, it's me, Grandma, it's me, Grandpa. Didn't you know me? So in that spirit of playfulness, in that spirit of joyfulness, in that spirit of seeing just how beautiful these little ones are, pretending to be something that they want to be. We want to discuss today about dropping our masks. Think of lifting your mask up and looking up to divine love and saying, it's me. Didn't you recognize me behind my mask? Didn't you recognize me behind my costume? So that's what we're going to talk about today. But I want to do something a little different. I want to try something a little different today. And I just want to toss out a few parables, a few stories. They're all related in some way, hopefully, but I just want to toss them out. Now, Vernon Howard, who I believe was a Unity minister down in Atlanta, wrote a book, and I've mentioned it before, but if you haven't gotten a copy of it yet, look for a book by Vernon Howard called Psychopictography, Psychopicto graphy, Psychopictography. And what this little book is a book of all very, very short visual stories. And what Vernon Howard is telling us is that we retain the story, we retain the visual image, we retain this creation. And this is important. When I'm telling you a story or you're telling me a story, I'm taking your words, but I'm creating this visual image that goes along with it. It's my creation. You stimulated it with your words, but it's my creation. And what Vernon Howard tells us is that long after we remember the words that we heard, we remember that picture. So he's organized this little book. I think there's like 160 different stories in there, and he's organized them so that if you're looking for stories that help build self-esteem, there's a section on that. If you're looking for stories that help us with prosperity, there's a section of stories on that, and so on. So it's a very, very useful book for your spiritual growth, because if you're working on health, You know, you might, every week you might read a different story that has something to do with that, and let that sink in. And of course, you know, many of the self-help psychology books that we've read and that you see, they're all about this kind of repeating the same thing in many different ways until it sort of filters into what they would call our subconscious mind. So sometimes we have to hear things over and over. We have to see them from different perspectives. We have to look at them from above and below and from the sides. And after hearing them so many times in so many different ways, the little light bulb goes off in our head and we go, oh. Sometimes that's so subtle that we don't even realize it. We just start to get it, you know, it just starts to get it. I think it was the Stoic philosophers who said that we absorb our culture. Our culture absorbs its values at our mother's breast. It's so subtle. See, it's so subtle that the ideas come in every day while we're growing, every day while we're learning. We absorb all of these different ideas. And what we tend to do is we tend to turn them into the masks that we wear. That's where we're going today. So the first story that Vernon Howard gives to us is about this little boy in Europe. And he was just 4 or 5 years old, you know. And of course, many of the fairy tales that we learned growing up, they were cautionary tales. You know, they were telling us not to do something that was dangerous. Don't go in the woods, you know. Hansel and Gretel, don't wander away from home. Little Red Riding Hood, don't be friendly to strange men. Things like this, you know. So this little boy, he was 4 or 5 years old maybe. And he was out playing one night, and he was out playing too far away from his home. He had gone further away from his home than his parents had told him. And this band of strangers comes along in their wagon, and they snatch him up, and they take him away. And as the creaky old wagon is going down the road, he can only get a little glimpse of the village kind of disappearing. It's down in the valley, and as they're going up over the hill, you know, the village is going to disappear. But what he can hear is he can hear the church bell ringing. They're getting ready for evening service, and the church bell is ringing, and he very, very clearly hears the pitch of that bell. And these people take this little boy off to wherever they're going, and they kind of make him work for them, you know, indentured servant. They kind of make him do the chores and take care of the animals and all these things. And his heart longs to be away from them. He wants to go back home, but he doesn't even know the name of the town he grew up in. He doesn't know. He doesn't remember anymore. He's kind of forgotten that. So one night when he's about 17 years old, he manages to sneak out from his captors, and he starts wandering across Europe. And he doesn't know which direction to go, and he doesn't know where he's from. But he remembers that bell. He remembers that bell. So every town he goes to, he waits until a church bell rings. And he listens to the tone. He says, that's not it. That's not it. And he follows the road until he gets to the next town. And that's not it. And that's not it. And then one day he's walking up the road, the dusty road, and he's coming up to a hill, and he can't really see what's on the other side, but he starts to hear it. He starts to hear that bell. And he stops and he listens. And his heart starts to beat faster. And he quickens his pace. That's the bell. That's the bell. And he gets to the top of the hill and he looks over. And there in the valley, that's his home. He's there. He remembered. He's arrived. Another story comes to us from further east. And there's a man who's sitting on the side of, of a little pond. And he has a little cloth bag, and in that cloth bag is a precious gemstone. And he takes the stone out of the bag to look at it in the sunlight, and it slips and it falls from his hand. And it goes into the water. And he reaches into the water, and frantically he starts splashing his hand around. He starts looking for the stone. And while he's doing this, his hand is stirring up ripples on the surface of the water, and the sunlight is reflecting off the ripples, and he can't see down below. All he can see is the little glittering of the sunlight off of the ripples. And his hand is stirring up the mud, and he can't see because the mud is covering up everything in the water. He's frantic. He's lost a precious gem. How is he going to find it? And finally he decides to be still. He stops splashing and thrashing. Over time the mud settles to the bottom. The water becomes calm. And he can see down into the pond, and he can see the sunlight reflecting off the gemstone. And he just gently reaches in and grabs it and puts it back in the sack. There was a movie that I saw one time, and I don't remember the name of it, but Jeremy Irons was the actor. And in this movie, he was playing the role of twin brothers, identical twins. And when he did it so masterfully that when he walked into the scene, when the character walked into the scene, you knew which brother it was. Even though it was the same actor portraying two different brothers, you knew which brother it was. And I don't want to give away the whole movie, but during the course of the movie, the one brother starts to impersonate the other brother. And even when he is impersonating, even when the one character is impersonating the other character, you're able to tell that that's not the real one. That's the other one pretending to be this one. It was a remarkable performance. And I saw an interview, because you know I'm very interested in films and movies and things like that. And I saw an interview with Jeremy Irons one time, and the interviewer asked him, he says, how did you do that? How did you, one person, how did you portray not only portray the two identical twins in a manner that we knew which one was which without you saying a word, but when one began to impersonate the other, we knew that it was that one impersonating this one. He says, how did you do that? And his answer was simple, but I remember it, and I guess it's the simple things we remember. He talked about the chakras, the energy centers. And he said what he did was when he portrayed one brother, he kept all of his attention into one chakra, maybe the stomach area, the solar plexus. And when he portrayed the other, he kept all of the energy in a different energy center. So what he tried to do was get himself focused and bring his energy to that center before he began performing as that particular brother. And then when he was playing one brother impersonating the other, he got the energy first into the brother that he was actually supposed to be, and then tried to force a little bit into the other center. And he said in doing that, because where his attention was, you see, where he put his attention, on which energy center he put his attention, that dictated the way he behaved. Where his consciousness was, then everything he did stemmed from that. The tales of the Knights of the Round Table, when I was a kid, we grew up with them, and of course I know many of you grew up, and we got Richard Harris playing playing King Arthur in Camelot, and all of these things, and very romantic, romanticized tales of knight chivalry and sword fights and all these kind of things. But in their essence, these tales, if you really want to explore them, in essence, these tales are about the individual's quest for finding the soul, your own spiritual nature. The Holy Grail is not the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper, as commonly believed. It is the discovery of the Christ within the self. It is the discovery of the presence of the divine within ourselves. The point where the divine becomes human as us, our soul, our spiritual nature. So there's one of the tales that just particularly impressed me, and it's A Night in the Lost City. And of course, each of these tales is much like the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell would tell us. There's a quest, and the seeker has to accept the quest and go out and face many challenges and overcome these many challenges in order to succeed, and then they come back to where they started. And when they come back to where they started, they're changed. They're different people, and in fact, they may realize that they never really left home. They just grew. So this one knight accepts this quest to go find the lost city. And he goes out, and it's a holy city. And he goes out and he goes on his quest, and he defeats all of the opponents, and he passes all of the tests and the trials and tribulations, and he arrives at the gate of the holy city. And the people there welcome him. "Oh, Sir Knight, we're going to make you our king. You have come to assume your rightful place as our leader." And he does. He ascends to the throne, and he begins leading, as the king needs to lead. And there's a knock on the door of the castle, and it's the knight's page who has come from Camelot after him. And the page says to him, "Sir Knight, have you forgotten? You have business to tend to back in Camelot. You have friends and family there. You have financial matters to take care of." And the knight says to the page, "You're right, I'll come with you and I'll get that taken care of." So the knight tells the people, "I must take your leave. I must go away for a little while. But I'll return. I'll be back. I just need to go take care of some business here." And the knight rides off with the page, and they go back to Camelot. And the knight gets re-engaged with his old business, his old friends, his old family, and he forgets. He forgets about the city. He forgets that he's the king of this city. And he never returns. We probably all know the tale, the fairy tale about the ugly duckling. There's this brood of little duck eggs that hatch, and one of them is different, and it's funny, and the others pick on it. And they don't accept it because it walks differently, and it talks differently, and it looks differently. And it's the ugly duckling. But of course, over time, it becomes a beautiful swan, the most beautiful bird. It discovers its true self. It stops trying to be a duck. And it starts to become what it is, a beautiful swan. And the last story I'm going to tell you is about classical musician Yo-Yo Ma. He was set to play a concert at Carnegie Hall, and he was walking to Carnegie Hall, and he got turned around. He lost his sense of direction. And of course, if you've been to New York City, there's lots of vendors on the street corners. There's hot dog wagons and pretzels and chestnuts and all kinds of things that you can literally just walk down the street and buy your lunch as you're walking. So Yo-Yo Ma stops at this little hot dog wagon. There's a little old guy with a cap, standing behind the hot dog wagon. He says, "Can I help you?" And Yo-Yo Ma says to him, he says, "Yes." He says, "Can you tell me how to get to Carnegie Hall?" And the guy says, "Practice." Of course, it's an old Henny Youngman joke. It was a different musician. Practice. practice. If you want to make progress, you have to practice. Not just read about it, not just talk about it, but practice. So how does this all come together? Where does this all come together? And what in the world does it have to do with Halloween? What we want to consider about ourselves and our own lives is, what is the most important thing? What is the most important thing in our own lives? And are we spending time with that? Are we practicing? Are we doing our practice? Are we moving towards that? So the starting place and perhaps the ending place is that we are all trying to discover our true nature, our spiritual nature. We're trying to find our way back home. We're trying to remember our way back to where we came from. We're trying to find that precious jewel. We're born into this world and we're left alone to try to figure out, who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? And we absorb ideas in our culture. We absorb our values from our friends, from our family, from our clergy, from our teachers. We get told all of these different things about who we are and why we're here and where we're going. And we create a persona, we create an identity, we create the mask that we wear. We try to project this image of what we think we should be based on what we have been told, on what is expected of us. Remember, what we expect as normal, what we expect and accept as normal, that's what we believe. And it's done unto us according to our belief. So we all spend our lives putting on these different costumes, these different roles. And like the character in the movie Nurse Betty, you know, we start to believe that we are the character that we have been playing or portraying. We start to believe that we are this fictionalized character that is just made up of, in the beginning, largely everybody else's expectations of who and what we are, what we should be, and how we should behave. So at the beginning of our life, of course, we put on the mask of child. Everybody tells us you're a child. And this is how children should behave. They should be seen and not heard. They should be respectful of their elders and all of these different things. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't recognize that our children are children. But what happens to us as children is we identify with that. We identify with that. Oh, that's who I am. Oh, I'm a good little boy. And oh, if I do this, I'm a good little boy. And oh, if I do that, I'm a bad little boy. And so on and so on and so on. So we start to try to live our lives as if we are that identity, that persona that we have created. It's a mask. What I'm saying is it's a mask that we put on, but we've forgotten that it's a mask. We've forgotten that it's just basically a collection of ideas. And we can change those ideas anytime that we want. But we form this sense of identity, this ego identity, that we then try to live our lives from. We might move up, you know, from being a child, we move into being a student. And now we have a different mask that we have to put on. In fact, when I was a kid, we had to put a uniform on. We had tan shirts, brown tie, corduroy pants. You could hear us coming a mile away. Whoop, 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 as the corduroy legs rubbed together. But now it's a different mask, and a different set of values went into creating the identity now, not only to be a good little boy or a bad little boy, but to be a good student or to be a bad student. And we start to adopt all of these ideas. We create an expanded sense of identity. We put on a bigger costume. Now the child is changing and becoming more mature. The expectations are changing. The roles are changing. We try to behave from this new persona of the way that we think that we ought to be, based on what everybody around us is telling us. And we might grow up after we graduate high school and college. And we step into a different role, you see. We step into a different one. Some of us went into service and we put on the costume of soldier. And we learned how to behave as soldiers. We learned how to march, and we learned how to salute. We learned the universal code of military justice, what good soldiers should do and what bad soldiers do, and how not to get caught doing what the bad soldiers do. But we performed and we created this sense of identity. Now I got Jack Webb doing the Soldier's Creed in the back of my head. I am an American fighting man. It was drilled into our heads. That's what we were. We were a soldier. And our personal sense of identification was dissolved into a unit sense. We were not as important as the unit was. If we needed to sacrifice for them, that's what we had to do. That's what was drilled into us, you see. But again, it's a collection of ideas. It's a mask that we wear. It's a costume. You imagine knocking on somebody's door and you're dressed up in your Class A uniforms. We go to work and we adopt the masks of an employee. We start to create this identity, and for many people the identity becomes very distorted, because then they say, well, I am my job. You ask people, who are you? And they'll tell you their job. Oh, I'm a manager for this company, or I'm an engineer for that company, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a lawyer. That's not who you are. It's a mask you wear. Your mask you wear. We get married, we enter relationships, and now we take on the role of significant other. We create this identification of ourselves as significant other, and we behave that way. We project ourselves that way. We think of ourselves that way. We have children, and we take on the role of parent. and then we find ourselves becoming our parents. We say, oh, what happened to me? I was never going to say that to my kids, but there we are. There we are. We're our parents, and we are parents, and we behave as parents. But it's only a role. It's only temporary, you see. It's only a place in life. It's a wonderful place in life. It's a wonderful time. But that's not who we are. That's not where we are. And you can go on, and you can go on, and you can go on with all of the different roles and identities and things that we take on. And then the question becomes, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? We start to search for our real self, our authentic self. We start to look for the Holy Grail, the holy city, which is within. See, the quest is never without. Everything out there is a projection of consciousness. The quest is within. So like the little boy who yearned to go back home and all he could remember was the faint ringing of the bell, there's something within you and I, there's something within us that tells us it's time to drop the masks. It's time to break our identification with the roles. That doesn't mean we stop performing our roles. What it means is we no longer think that that is what we are. I am not my job. I am not my position. I am not my relationship. I am a spiritual being who is expressing life through these things, as these things, but they are not who and what I am. The quest begins. The quest begins. Usually it's around the time of a midlife crisis. Usually it's around our late 30s or early 40s, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes much later. But at some point in our life, we have to say, hey, wait a minute. I spent my whole life letting other people tell me who and what I am. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to somebody else's expectations. I've let other people stick their hand in my pond and muddy up the waters, you see. I've let other people snatch me away from my village and carry me off and put me to work for their own purposes. But now I have to find my authentic self. I have to drop the masks. So these are the things that we've been talking about on and off for the last few weeks, and if you think about it, forever. What our purpose is not to collect stuff, not to build stuff, not to create stuff, organizations and things like that. So much of the material world will judge people based on how much money they had when they died, or how big an organization they had when they died. You know, this person built this organization from the ground up, and it became this great enterprise. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not who they are. See, that's just something they did. And it's probably not even the most important thing that they did. Somewhere in the New Testament, Paul says, you know, what good does it do if we accomplish all these things and we have lost our own soul? I would change that a bit and say if we haven't discovered it, probably saying the same thing, because I don't think you can lose it. I think you can misplace it, you can ignore it, but like that little bell ringing in that little boy's head, in his heart, there is something within us that is calling us home. Meister Eckhart says that God is like the child who plays hide and seek and clears its throat so you will find it. There is something within us that is calling us home. So if we awaken to that calling, right, there's a stirring within us, but each and every one of us can only awaken at the proper time. Each and every one of us can only step into it at the proper time. And sometimes, like the night, we step into it, we make progress on our quest, we go forward and we find it, and then we lose it again. We forget about it again. We go back into the old role and we put back on the old masks. The old masks are comfortable. We've had them for a long time. We know what they're like. We don't quite understand what it's like to live as spiritual beings. I know I've told you the interview with Grace Slick that I saw, and she was talking about her sobriety. And the interviewer asked her if, you know, when she stopped drinking, if she slipped and went back. And she said, oh yeah. She said, you know why? She said, I knew what I was like when I was drunk. I didn't have a clue who I was or how to act when I was sober. And I had to learn that before I could stay sober. We're all in that process of being very comfortable with acting out of the old roles and acting out of the old identities and acting out of the old ways, but now we're going to have to learn what it's like to be spiritual, to live our spiritual truth, not only to discover it, but to live it. And like Yo-Yo Ma looking for Carnegie Hall, the answer is going to be practice. 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 Or a spiritual practice is for the purpose of letting go of the old masks, the old identities, breaking those patterns, and finding that gemstone, finding that holy city within, hearing the bell of the place from which we come. So here are just a couple of things that we can do. First, the first thing I would suggest is, of the stories that I have tossed out this morning, is there one that speaks to you more than the others? And if so, take some time. Take some time to sit and be with it and let it play out in your head, in your mind's eye. Let it play out. And let yourself become that character, that little boy or that little girl that was carried away, or the person who is looking for the gemstone, or the knight on the quest in the holy city, or the ugly duckling coming into discovering your true nature. Instead of trying to be like the ducks, become that swan. And what we can recognize from the story about the actor Jeremy Irons is that where we put our attention, that tends to give guidance to how we behave. So the first thing you can do is notice, where is your attention during the day? Where are you coming from during the day? How do things impress you during the day? Now, for most of the world, it's not very difficult, right? If you think again of the 7 chakra systems, and Maslow took those and put them in a pyramid called the hierarchy of needs. Everybody says, "Ooh, look at that! Isn't that wonderful?" But those ideas had been around for thousands of years. The first group of energy centers that we deal with have to do with survival and struggle. Survival and struggle, right? How do we stay alive? How do we reproduce? How do we get our will imposed? How do we maintain control, right? First 3 chakras. And that's where most of the world is. Turn on the news, that's where the news is. Turn on the TV shows. Those are the dramas on the TV shows. That is the realm where the human energy spins and spins and spins and spins. And if we are to break out of that, we have to, first of all, become aware of where our energy is. And then secondly, where do we want it to be? Where do we want it to be? So an interesting thing, in Buddhism, the symbol that they use for the chakras is an upside down triangle overlaid over a right side up triangle. 2 triangles, right? And interestingly enough, that gives us a 6-pointed star that we have in Judaism. So the first 3 chakras, the triangle is pointing up. The second 3 chakras, the triangle is pointing down. And where they overlap is at the heart. At the heart center. See, this is where we begin. This is where we begin to awaken to our spirituality. It is in the heart. In the mythology of Buddhism, the Buddha is born from his mother's side. The idea of the Buddha comes from the heart, see, not through human beings. In Christianity, right, the Christ child was conceived not by ordinary means, but from the Holy Spirit, an idea of God. This idea that the spiritual nature is within us is not something that comes in ordinary ways. It is an idea of the divine. The symbol of the Christian cross, the vertical and the horizontal. If you look at the human body and you stand with your arms stretched out like that, they intersect at the heart. At the heart. That's where we begin to awaken. That's only where we begin to awaken to our spiritual nature. Then we come to the throat, which is self-expression, where we begin to express our spiritual nature, like the ugly duckling that become the swan. We begin to express what we truly are. The third eye then is our intuition. It is where we start to get in tune with that which comes to us not through the ordinary means, but through a deeper knowledge. And then, of course, the seventh chakra, the crown. This is where we actually really begin to feel the unity, the experience of oneness. So one thing that we can try to do as we do our practice is try to deliberately bring your energy to another place. You can try for a day to just be aware that you wish to hold your energy in your heart. You wish to experience everything through love. Just try that, even if it's only for 10 minutes. Or your third eye is another good place, because there's something there, that the mystics will tell us. There's something there that when we turn our attention to that, to our intuitive center, there's a gland, I think it's pineal gland that's up there, that reacts to the attention. We can begin to feel it. We can begin to experience our intuition. But whichever it is, try to move out of the first 3 energy centers. Try to move into love. Am I acting today from love? Try to move into self-expression. Hold your energy here. And is what I am doing today an expression of my spiritual nature? Is what I'm about to say an expression of my spiritual nature? We'll probably find we'll be quiet if we do that. If we have a task to begin, can we bring our attention up to our third eye? And can we invite intuition to inform us? Can we carry our energy there in that chakra for even a little while to begin to see how our behaviors then change? Like Jeremy Irons, carrying our energy in a different place can get us to behave in a different way. And this last one I want to give you is so easy, and so many, when we were talking this morning, so many of us said the same thing, It's a beautiful, clear day. It is a beautiful, clear day. And I assume it's going to be a beautiful, clear night. Can you find some place where you can just sit and stare at the emptiness? Look up at the blue sky. And don't pay attention to the clouds, but pay attention to the blue. Look out at night into the sky and don't pay attention to the stars, but pay attention to the space. Can you bring your awareness into the emptiness, into the nothingness, to break the distractions of everything that's going on in this busy world, and just be at home. Be at home. Divine love has created us out of itself. It has left us alone to make that discovery. As we have gone through life, many people have given us their opinions, and we have added our own assumptions on top of those, and we have created these costumes, these masks that we have been wearing through life. There comes a time where we need to let go of those and discover who and what we truly are. The way to do that has been taught to us over and over for thousands of years. Be still and know. Be still and know. Neti, neti, not this, not that. I am not this, I am not that. A couple weeks ago we talked about being aware of the gap between your breaths, becoming aware of the gap between your thoughts. Many different techniques, many different ways that we have been taught that all do the same thing. They break our identification with the human, and they allow us to discover the divine love, the divine presence that has always been here. Like the gemstone lying in the pond, it's always been here. But we haven't been able to see it because we've been too busy stirring up the mud. So I invite you this week, please take a few moments to contemplate. What masks have you been wearing? Are you ready to lay them down? Are you ready to drop your masks? Are you ready to do the work? Are you ready to put in the practice? Are you ready to do the techniques, to find the technique that works for you, and to use it, to spend time with it? A few minutes here, a few minutes there, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night. But you have to use it. You have to use it. Someone asked Joel Goldsmith once how long it would take people to become spiritually awakened. And he said that's a direct result of how much time they spend in practice. If they don't practice it, it'll take forever. If they practice a lot, it'll happen sooner. When do you want to step into the fullness of what you truly are? When do you want to assume the throne of the holy city that is within you? Become aware of your spiritual nature. To start to act and behave as that spiritual being that you truly are. Is now the time? Then begin at once. And so it is.